3 minutes ago, behind a locked door inside Windsor Castle, King Charles placed his signature beneath an order no one outside his smallest circle was prepared to see. With one deliberate stroke of the pen, he gave Catherine custodial authority over Windsor's crown jewel archive, a collection guarded by monarchs, courtiers, and family secrets for generations. But the moment the ink dried, the silence inside the room became heavier than any crown. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. Charles had summoned Catherine. She entered expecting a briefing about an approaching state occasion, but the king said nothing at first. The keeper of the royal collection stood nearby, joined by 2 senior witnesses who understood that the chamber was restricted to the monarch and those responsible for the crown's most guarded possessions. The Crown Jewel Archive meant the protected collection of royal jewels, records, and inheritance instructions preserved for ceremonial and dynastic use. That explanation could not prepare her for what waited on the table. Catherine lowered her eyes to the order. She read the first paragraph once, then again, slower this time. The document transferred control of preservation, ceremonial access, private inventories, and future royal use into her hands. It also gave her authority over sealed records, disputed ownership notes, handwritten royal annotations, and objects withheld from public ceremonies. Her face changed before she spoke. The king watched her disbelief. He did not smile. He did not soften the moment with ceremony. Charles pushed the order closer and said, "This is not a gift. It is a duty I can no longer leave uncertain." Catherine looked at him, searching for reassurance. But the monarch's expression carried something darker than pride. It carried urgency. One paragraph changed everything. No member of the royal household, the official network of royal family offices, staff, and residences, could remove, borrow, reclassify, or privately examine any item without Catherine's written approval. That clause placed her above old habits, private requests, and influence. It also guaranteed resistance. Charles removed his glasses and set down the pen. He warned her that someone had believed the archive would eventually fall under her control, not Catherine's. The princess felt the weight of his words, because this was no ceremonial favor. It was a line drawn inside the family. Then footsteps stopped outside the locked chamber. The handle moved once. Catherine turned toward the door, while the king remained still. The order had been signed, but before Catherine could understand the power placed in her hands, she would have to face the people who believed that power belonged to them. The archive was made of diamonds, gold, velvet cases, and centuries of royal memory. But the real danger was human. For Catherine, the order meant carrying the expectations of queens who came before her. For Charles, it meant admitting that trust inside his own household had fractured. For William, it meant protecting his wife from a battle she had never requested. And for Camilla, it meant discovering that a door she expected to control had closed. Catherine found William in a private sitting room and placed the sealed folder between them. She kept her voice controlled, but one hand remained pressed against the cover, as though releasing it would make the burden permanent. The archive was not simply a collection of costly jewels. It was the protected record of which royal women could wear certain pieces, when those objects could appear, and whose memory they would represent before the world. William read the opening page without interrupting. Then the prince moved toward the fireplace, turned back, and asked the question Catherine had feared. "Did my father tell Camilla before he signed it?" She did not answer. Her silence told him everything. The future king felt pride first. He trusted his wife's restraint, judgment, and respect for the crown. But fear followed close behind. Whoever controlled access to the archive also influenced how Queen Elizabeth II, Queen Mary, Diana, and other royal women would be remembered through public ceremonies. Catherine had gained authority, yet she had also been placed inside a rivalry where every necklace, tiara, and sealed record could become a symbol of victory or rejection. Charles already understood that danger. For months, the king had studied conflicting inventories, private borrowing requests, and handwritten instructions connected to generations of royal jewelry. An inventory was the official list recording where each object belonged and who could use it. Several entries did not agree. Some requests had passed through unusual channels. Others appeared designed to blur the line between temporary access and lasting control. Camilla learned of the signed order before anyone formally informed her. A member of her office approached the archive corridor and was denied entry by a security officer acting under new instructions. The Queen Consort received the account while preparing for a private luncheon. She stopped fastening a bracelet, dismissed her dresser, and sat in silence before asking for Charles. The monarch refused the immediate meeting. Instead, he sent a brief written message through his private secretary. The decision concerns the future custody of the crown. Custody meant legal responsibility for protecting and controlling access, not personal ownership. Yet Camilla understood the emotional meaning instantly. Those exact words carried her back to an earlier jewel review. Catherine had entered that meeting calm and left visibly shaken. To understand why Charles acted without warning, the story must return to the single ceremony where trust inside Windsor finally broke. The order did not begin with a signature. It began 6 weeks earlier, during what should have been a routine review of ceremonial jewelry for a diplomatic banquet. No cameras were present. No announcement was planned. Yet inside a secured gallery, one disputed velvet case turned a private discussion into a confrontation and convinced Charles that the Crown Jewel Archive could no longer remain vulnerable to personal ambition. Charles had approved the closed review because the state banquet would place royal symbolism under intense public attention. A state banquet is a formal dinner hosted for a visiting national leader, where every jewel, title, and seating choice carries political meaning. Catherine, Camilla, the collection keeper, and one royal dresser attended because several pieces under consideration carried complicated histories. Some were associated with Queen Elizabeth II. Others were tied to Diana. A few had long been reserved for the monarch or the woman expected to become the next queen. Camilla moved first. She instructed the keeper to place Diana's emerald and diamond ceremonial set on her personal selection table. The case had remained protected for years, and the archive notation clearly reserved it for Catherine's future use. An archive notation is an official written instruction explaining how an object may be handled, displayed, or assigned. The keeper hesitated, but the Queen Consort repeated the request. Catherine noticed the marking immediately. She pointed to the notation and quietly asked whether the case had been moved by mistake. Camilla closed the inventory book and answered without hesitation. Future use is not present authority. The words struck harder than any raised voice. Catherine did not argue. She stepped back from the table, but her face changed in front of the staff. The princess had spent years serving the monarchy without demanding symbols of status, yet in that instant, she was made to feel temporary inside the future she had helped protect. Charles entered after hearing the tension from the corridor. The king saw Catherine near the door, Camilla beside the open case, and the keeper refusing to meet his eyes. He asked who had authorized the selection. The collection keeper answered through a documented account later placed in the audit file. Several private access instructions had arrived from the Queen Consort's office during the previous month. The monarch said little in the room. Later that evening, he examined those instructions alone and found something worse. One request attempted to change the internal classification of 3 pieces linked to Diana, moving them from reserved family items into reigning consort ceremonial use. Charles felt personally betrayed. Rules had been challenged, but something deeper had been damaged. Catherine had been humiliated inside a future she had never tried to seize. He ordered a confidential audit that same night. The disputed tiara had exposed the fracture, but the next private meeting would force Charles to choose between preserving peace in his marriage and protecting the future of the crown. There were no aides inside the room when Charles finally confronted Camilla. No private secretary stood nearby to soften the language. No courtier waited to interrupt the silence. Only a sealed audit, a disputed list of jewels, and two people who understood that the argument before them was larger than diamonds. It was about legitimacy, memory, and whether the king still trusted the woman seated across from him. Charles had chosen a small Windsor library, far from the household offices and ceremonial apartments. The audit was a confidential review tracing who requested access, which rules were bypassed, and whether royal property had been handled correctly. He placed the file on the table and asked why instructions involving pieces linked to Diana had been issued without consulting him or Catherine. His voice remained controlled, but the restraint made every word feel sharper. Camilla did not open the file. She kept her hands folded and answered that the monarchy could not be managed around the sensitivities of the past. The queen consort said old associations could not determine every present decision, especially when she carried public duties of her own. Her tone stayed steady, yet Charles heard the defensiveness beneath it. The king moved the audit closer. He told her the issue was not sensitivity, it was authority. Royal custody meant the official responsibility for protecting, recording, and controlling objects held for the crown, rather than for personal use. Personal preference could not rewrite that duty, no matter how senior the request appeared. Camilla's restraint finally broke. She accused Catherine of allowing silence to become influence. The princess, she argued, never needed to demand power because others placed it around her. Charles stiffened when Diana's name entered the exchange with a dismissive edge. He rose, crossed to the door, and closed it firmly before turning back. Catherine had not requested one jewel, he said. She had not challenged Camilla publicly. She had not used staff, rank, or memory to force a claim. The monarch then opened the audit himself and pointed to 4 access requests routed around the official collection keeper. One attempted to view sealed inheritance instructions, private records explaining how specific royal possessions should pass between generations. Camilla finally looked at the pages. Then she admitted the truth. She wanted to know which pieces would remain available to her if Charles's reign ended sooner than expected. The queen feared losing not only access, but the visible place she had spent years trying to secure. The admission changed him. Anger gave way to sadness, but not forgiveness. Fear explained the breach. It did not erase it. Charles told her the archive would now be placed under independent family custody. He refused to reveal the chosen name. Camilla left, believing the decision could still be influenced, unaware that the king had already begun constructing an order designed to survive every objection. Charles did not choose Catherine because she asked for control. He chose her because she never did. While others argued over access, symbolism, and precedence, the princess had spent years treating royal history as something borrowed, rather than owned. That restraint became her greatest strength. Behind the locked offices of Windsor, the king began building a transfer of power, based not on rank alone, but on the person he believed would never exploit it. Charles reviewed every mechanism available to him. Custodial responsibility meant the legal duty to protect, record, and control access to crown property, while ownership remained with the monarchy itself. The king discovered that this authority could be privately delegated without surrendering the jewels or weakening the crown's claim. Catherine's place beside the heir connected her directly to the future reign, but he refused to let marriage become the only reason for choosing her. The monarch summoned the collection keeper and asked for a documented account of Catherine's previous archive visits. The keeper recalled one moment clearly. During an earlier review, the princess had refused to try on a historic necklace because its family record had not been fully verified. She could have accepted the privilege without question. Instead, she stepped back and asked for the history to be settled first. That memory stayed with Charles. Yet the decision still carried pain. Choosing his daughter-in-law over his wife would look like more than an administrative change. It would be read as judgment. The king understood that Camilla would feel rejected, while Catherine could be accused of taking advantage of a family fracture she had never created. William offered to speak with Camilla before the order was finalized. The prince believed a private warning might prevent a deeper confrontation. But Charles refused. He told his son that Catherine could not receive the archive through negotiation, pressure, or family argument. She had to receive it through clear royal authority. The order gave her power to approve ceremonial loans, protect sealed records, review future classifications, and block unofficial access requests. A ceremonial loan meant temporary permission to use a royal object for an official event without changing ownership. One special clause extended Catherine's authority through royal illness, temporary incapacity, a transition of reign, or any change in household leadership. Charles paused over the final draft. One sentence described Catherine merely as William's representative. The king crossed it out and replaced it with language naming her as custodian in her own right. He then looked at his private secretary and said, "She must carry this because she earned trust, not because she married it." Once the signed order reached the archive staff, the first denied request arrived within hours. Camilla immediately understood what Charles had done. The power behind the signature was now unmistakable, and its first consequence would arrive before the palace had time to prepare a public explanation. Royal power rarely announces itself with shouting. Sometimes it appears as a key that no longer works, a request returned without approval, or a guard quietly stepping into a doorway. By the morning after Charles signed the order, Windsor's routines had already changed. Catherine's authority was no longer theoretical, and the first person to experience that new reality was the woman who had believed the archive would always remain within her reach. Charles ordered hand-delivered copies sent to the archive keeper, royal security, Catherine's private secretary, and the Lord Chamberlain's office, the department responsible for organizing major royal ceremonies and managing key parts of the household. Each copy carried the same instruction. No jewel, record, case, or private inventory could be accessed without Catherine's written approval, regardless of rank. Camilla's senior dresser arrived that morning to collect a diamond brooch for an evening reception. The request appeared routine. The brooch had been used before, and the queen consort expected no delay. But the guard at the archive entrance stepped forward and asked for Catherine's authorization. When the dresser could not produce it, the request was returned. Camilla read the card in silence. Catherine's new custodial title appeared across the top, confirming that the princess now controlled access to the collection. The queen gripped the paper until one corner bent beneath her fingers. Then she reached for the telephone and called Charles directly. The king answered and listened without interruption. Camilla asked whether he had intended to humiliate her in front of her own staff. Charles said no. He explained that the restriction applied to everyone, including Catherine herself. Crown property could no longer be treated as personal possession, borrowed through influence, or moved without a clear written record. Camilla heard the fairness in his words, but the pain remained. Rules that applied to everyone still carried a sharper meaning for her, because she was the first person publicly stopped by them. The queen ended the call without asking again for the brooch. Charles remained on the line for several seconds after the silence began. Catherine faced a different shock inside the archive. She found a sealed record listing jewels removed from regular circulation after Diana's death. Regular circulation meant items normally available for official ceremonies, state occasions, or approved family use. One entry pointed to a piece that should have remained in a protected compartment. The princess asked the keeper to open the case. The assigned space was empty. No authorized transfer appeared in the ledger. No signed request explained the absence. The item had been missing for years. Catherine closed the record and instructed the keeper not to alert the wider household until she had spoken privately with Charles and William. The first closed door had wounded Camilla, but the empty space inside one archive case threatened to reopen a far older royal wound. For the first time since receiving the archive, Catherine stood without Charles, courtiers, or legal language around her. Only William was present when she revealed that a jewel linked to Diana had vanished from its recorded place. What happened next was not a palace procedure. It was a private decision between husband and wife. One that would determine whether Catherine used her new authority to punish, conceal, or protect. Catherine asked William to meet her alone after the children had retired, and Windsor had fallen quiet. She placed the archive ledger between them and pointed to one entry, a sapphire clasp last recorded among Diana's reserved personal pieces. A ledger is the official book used to track where royal objects are stored, moved, or assigned. The missing line mattered because it connected family memory to legal responsibility, and any unexplained gap could become a weapon inside the household. William read the entry twice. The prince closed his eyes briefly, then asked whether Camilla's office had entered the compartment. Catherine answered carefully. The evidence was incomplete. No signed transfer existed, but no record proved who had removed the clasp either. The future king wanted an immediate investigation. He feared that another part of his mother's history had been mishandled, hidden, or absorbed into someone else's royal identity. For William, the missing jewel was not simply an object. It represented Diana's place in the family, and the danger of allowing silence to rewrite what belonged to her memory. Catherine refused to accuse anyone without proof. She told him the archive could not become a weapon for settling family pain, even when that pain was real. Her new authority would mean nothing if she used it to confirm suspicions instead of facts. The collection keeper returned later with a documented restoration receipt found inside an older preservation file. Charles had personally removed the clasp years earlier so it could be repaired and protected for William's future family. A restoration receipt is a formal record, showing when a historic object leaves storage for expert repair or preservation. The king's private instruction revealed more. He had intended the piece to pass to Charlotte when she was old enough to understand its connection to Diana, but the direction had never been entered into the central ledger. William's anger collapsed into grief. Catherine reached across the table, and neither spoke for several seconds. Then she made her choice. The princess would not turn the incomplete record into scandal. Instead, she created a protected register requiring every future transfer, including one ordered by the monarch, to be documented clearly. The archive had tested Catherine with the very pain that could have corrupted her authority. But the world outside Windsor was about to judge the decision without knowing what she had chosen to protect. By sunrise, the private order was no longer private. The country awoke to a royal transfer few believed possible. Catherine had been given control of Windsor's crown jewel archive, while Charles was still on the throne. Broadcasters called it a declaration of trust. Commentators called it a warning. Outside Windsor Castle, crowds gathered beneath the stone walls, sensing that they had witnessed more than a change in jewelry administration. The palace released a carefully worded statement confirming Catherine's appointment as custodian of the archive. Custodian meant the person responsible for protecting the collection, controlling access, and ensuring every ceremonial use was properly recorded. The statement stressed preservation, continuity, and accountability, because the decision touched both public tradition and private family memory. One newspaper captured the shock in a single front page. Catherine appeared beneath the headline, "The Keeper of Windsor," while a smaller image of Charles signing at a desk carried the words, "A King's Final Word on Trust." During a morning television bulletin, the anchor called the order the clearest transfer of internal royal confidence since Catherine became Princess of Wales. Outside the Henry VI gate, supporters gathered with white flowers and handwritten notes, thanking the princess for protecting the late Queen's legacy. The gate is one of Windsor Castle's most recognized public entrances, making the gathering impossible for the palace to ignore. The crowd did not see a routine administrative change. They saw Charles choosing the woman he trusted to guard the monarchy's most emotional symbols. Catherine watched the coverage beside William. The prince saw her discomfort when commentators described her as victorious. She immediately asked her staff to avoid any language suggesting that someone else had been defeated. For Catherine, success built on humiliation would weaken the very duty she had been given. Camilla saw the same newspaper alone. The queen consort folded it once through Catherine's image, then stopped. She slowly smoothed the page flat again. The gesture revealed more than anger. It showed a woman recognizing that the public had already turned a private decision into a personal verdict. Charles refused demands to explain the family conflict behind the order. Instead, the king released one sentence through a documented palace statement. "The crown is preserved by those who understand that custody is service." The palace also confirmed that Catherine's authority included pieces connected to Diana, ending any possibility that those jewels could be reassigned without her approval. The princess answered the attention with action. Her first formal directive was not to select a jewel for herself. She ordered a complete audit, a digital register, and a preservation review of the entire collection. The country had chosen its interpretation. Yet inside Windsor, one final conversation remained, before the order could become more than a victory, a rejection, or another royal wound. In the end, the private order was never truly about who could open a cabinet or choose a tiara. It was about who could be trusted with memory without turning memory into power. Charles had placed Catherine between the monarchy's most painful past and its uncertain future. Camilla had been forced to face the limits of her position. William had seen his wife inherit a burden once carried by women whose lives were shaped by the crown. Charles asked Catherine and Camilla to join him for one final private meeting. The king did not summon them to reverse the order or soften its authority. He wanted to prevent bitterness from becoming its permanent legacy. The Crown Jewel Archive meant the protected collection of royal jewels, records, and inheritance instructions held for the monarchy rather than any one individual. That distinction mattered because the family had nearly allowed personal fear to take control of public history. The monarch placed 3 archive keys on the table. He gave the master key to Catherine, left the ceremonial access key with the collection keeper, and locked the former private request key inside a sealed box. Camilla watched without protest. The queen consort finally told Catherine that the public would see the decision as a judgment against her, even if the palace never admitted it. Catherine answered with quiet firmness. She would never use the archive to erase Camilla's place, but she would not allow any royal woman, past, present, or future, to be erased for another person's comfort. Charles lowered his head. The king understood that the princess had expressed the principle he had failed to protect clearly enough during earlier years. Camilla accepted the final boundary. She would retain ceremonial access, meaning approved use of royal jewels for official duties, but she would no longer hold personal control. The restriction wounded her, yet it also released her from the desperate struggle to secure a legacy through objects that had never belonged to one person alone. William understood the deeper meaning. Catherine had not been raised above the family. She had been placed in service to its history, under rules strong enough to protect Diana, Elizabeth, Camilla, Charlotte, and every royal woman who would follow. The princess returned each jewel to its documented place, preserved Charles's written instruction for Charlotte, and declared that no item would ever again be privately reclassified. The order marked the moment she stopped being treated merely as a future queen waiting in the wings. She became the trusted guardian, connecting the monarchy's past to its next reign. The king had not handed Catherine a treasure chest. He had handed her proof of his confidence. By accepting it without triumph, revenge, or greed, she showed exactly why he had chosen her. And when the archive door closed that evening, Windsor's jewels remained where they had always belonged. But the trust guarding them had passed decisively into Catherine's hands.